Craig, welcome to the show. Listen, mate, just quietly, do people get a bit miffy about wind farms being close to them?
Not necessarily. Some see them as important sources of, there might be a revenue stream from siting a wind turbine on a farmer's paddock. There are certainly consenting processes that you have to go through to consult with neighbours who have the right to object, of course. But the newer turbines are much less noisier than the older technology. And the question is always, how do you create a electricity system that produces the energy demands or meets the energy demand of consumers into the future? If you want to move away from fossil fuels.
I understand that. I mean, I understand the economic argument of why you'd have wind farms.
Yep.
I'm just saying, because they're obviously. I mean, you look at Palmerston North, and I mean, you can't evade the wind farms, so they're a visual issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering. People say I've never lived near a wind farm, so I don't know. But are they very noisy, Craig?
So they don't. It depends how far away you are. So under the consent processes, there are discussions around attenuation of noise, which is, how far away people are from the noise. Typically, when you're looking at developing a site, you're trying to do three things. Find a site that's windy, which is an obvious thing to say. Secondly, a site that's close to the Transpower grid. And thirdly, a site where neighbours are relatively unaffected. So, it's quite important when you think about site selection. On the top of the hills behind Palmerston North, it's a pretty good site.
Yeah, and no neighbours. Ironically, actually, Palmerston North has gone the other way. It seems to have endorsed them. In fact, I think they call the rugby team right. The Manawatu Turbos.
Yeah. That's right. So their planning regime is encouraging the use of wind energy in their district, and they're very supportive. And we've got to respect all sorts of processes, but they're very supportive of further development. So we've, as you know, put applications in to extend our wind farm and get a reconsent, and we're in that process now. So we're very grateful for the support.
Okay, today you want to talk about our decline and the least corrupt country status. You're seeing a particular problem there.
Yeah, and I'll look back to wind turbines, perversely enough, at the end, so it's kind of coincidental that you've raised it. So just for your listeners, our ranking in it's a global survey called the Corruption Perception Index. We fell out of the top two positions at their latest survey that came out at the end of January. We've normally been first or second, and we have been since 2011, but we've dropped to third, getting 85 out of 100. And we're now behind Denmark and behind Finland. And the drop in New Zealand was primarily due to responses to an executive survey undertaken by the World Economic Forum in 2023, which is one of 8 contributing surveys to the index. And the survey asked respondents, and these are executives around New Zealand, how common it was for business to make extra payments or bribes connected with trade, utilities, public utilities, tax payments, or awarding of public contracts. And secondly, how common was it for public funds to be diverted to companies, individuals, or groups due to corruption? So they're kind of questions that executives got asked. And according to the survey response overall, that was an issue for New Zealand. We must have dropped. So in my mind, I was thinking, well, what's the definition of corruption? It's the use of bribery to influence the actions of a public official. And bribery is the improper use of gifts and favours in exchange for personal gain. So then I thought about the Resource Management Act and the consenting process, and noted late last year that Genesis and Meridian Energy, and this goes to your, perversely enough, to your comments around Waitaki Hydro, Genesis and Meridian Energy are spending, or did spend, maybe they still are spending, more than $180 million to smooth the path of reconsenting. This is not a new consent. This is the existing Waitaki Hydro scheme. To smooth the path of reconsenting the Waitaki Hydro scheme. That was late last year. And to smooth that, there are payments made to the Department of Conservation and to Hapu in the area. I don't know the breakdown of that $180 million and who that went to, but there's no legal reason why Genesis and Meridian should make those payments, as I understand it. It is to smooth the pathway of consent. So then you look at the fast-track consenting process, which involves an entity called the Environmental Protection Authority, the EPA. The members of that authority are nominated for a panel for a consent process by three entities: relevant local authorities, relevant iwi authorities, and relevant regional planning committees. And there's usually 2 or 3 members sourced from those groups on a panel for a particular consent, and it's chaired by an environmental court judge or a retired environmental court judge. Now, the question on the table is, to redefine, is this an example of bribery, where a commercial entity has to make ex gratia payments to third parties to smooth the pathway through the Environmental Protection Authority to gain a consent? In this case, it's a reconsent. It's already existing. I'm asking the question because I don't know the answer, but I do know that the government's announced reforms to the Resource Management Act that Chris Bishop announced late last month, which is to reform the Act by the end of 2024 to focus on property rights and to appoint an expert ministerial advisory group to think about a reformed RMA. So I'm wondering, the cost of consents to getting renewable energy projects off the ground includes these payments to third parties, which are not required by law. They are made to smooth the process to get the consent, with the risk being that the consent gets turned down, which is an awful situation for a commercial business.
Okay. Can I just give some background too? Because this story should have got a lot more prominence than it did last year, Craig, when it was first reported. I think about this time last year, about February of last year actually. But I guess it was lost amongst so much else that was happening in the world. But the payments of 180 million that Genesis and Meridian are talking about, they included payments to 3 Ngaitahu hapu. So
Yep.
in the Department of Conservation, you say, and others, unspecified
Yep.
others,
Yep.
to quote-unquote redress past damage in exchange for supporting the application. Now, that's the words of those two. And to redress past damage in exchange for supporting the application.
Correct.
The two companies confirmed an agreement had been reached with the 3 hapu to support the reconsent. And the business desk, who I think was New Zealand Herald at the time, has been told the agreement comes with a package of more than $100 million for those hapu, but the gentailers would not confirm this saving. So not only is everything you say absolutely accurate, but that would suggest corruption to me. Yeah?
Well, I'm being brutally frank here. We call it Cohar Example.
Yeah.
Example. It's difficult to get an EPA approval at the best of times, but to smooth the pathway by providing ex gratia payments to third parties on the basis that if you didn't, they would object, and you risk a failure of consent, is just the worst possible outcome for companies. They have it's not a legal requirement, but their hands are effectively tied by a process which is loaded against them. Because on the EPA is a representative, potentially, of a relevant iwi authority, and they will object, potentially, to the scheme going through, unless some sort of compensation is made, undefined, without legal reasons, to a hapu. Why?
Yeah. No.
If you're looking with a cold, hard light of day from the outside, you'd be
that's
saying
corruption.
This is backsheesh. This is corruption. And that is why I'm concerned about our perceptions under the survey, the Corruption Perception Index, could fall further because businesses are starting to say this is wrong and this is why the RMA needs to change.
Yeah.
It is potentially a legacy of the treaty, and it's a government to hapu iwi's leaders who signed the treaty, but it's not a commercial issue for companies today.
No. And if there was past redress required, or past injustice or whatever, you wouldn't expect our generation companies, electricity unit, to in actual fact be paying out that money because it's nothing to do with them.
Correct. It should be done by the taxpayer, represented by our proxy representatives in Parliament who make the redress under the Waitangi Tribunal, etc. But forcing corporates who don't have much choice in the matter to make those payments to compensate for a redress that the government hasn't done is a very different issue.
Listen, you've hit on something here.